Welcome to Tuesday Devotions. We are continuing with our study of Unveiling Revelation. We finished the first half of the book, and today we will start with chapter 12. Up to this point, Revelation has been giving us the view from heaven. It is focused on God's throne and the judgments He is pouring out on the earth. And while we have seen many events that are happening on earth, they are viewed from heaven's perspective. As we begin the second half of the book, John's vision in the next few chapters particularly will deal more with Satan and his actions during the end times. This story begins with this important vision of chapter 12 that takes us from the beginning of Satan's rebellion against God to the end times that the book of Revelation has been describing. Along the way, we will meet Satan's unholy trinity, his imitation of the Godhead. And we will get a glimpse of his plans and how he carries them out. And we will learn what are Satan's goals and purpose in opposing God. This epic journey begins with what I call a history of Satan. To get a full scope of the first part of this vision, we need to read the first 5 verses in their entirety. And I found this interesting video online that will do that for us.
And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne.
The first thing we notice in these verses is it mentions a great sign appeared in heaven. A sign is a symbol or an event that points to a reality or a truth. John uses this word 17 times in his gospel to describe Jesus' miracles. His miracles were not just events in history, but pointed to who he was. They meant something more. These 2 signs in Revelation 12 point us to more as well. They draw our attention to some important things. Revelation 12:1, a great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. So who is this woman? This is probably the most debated image in this chapter. This woman has been identified as everyone from the church to the Virgin Mary. We know it cannot be Mary, even though she literally does give birth to Jesus, but the events later on in chapter 12 have no correlation to the life of Mary. It also cannot be the church. In the New Testament, the church is never pictured as a mother, but always pictured as a bride. The woman in this vision gives birth to Messiah, and Jesus gave birth to the church. The church did not give birth to Jesus. Some suggest this woman is a symbol of God's people in all ages, which would include believing Israel in the Old Testament and the church today. But I believe the images and descriptions given here point to this woman being a picture of the nation of Israel. There are many Old Testament passages like Isaiah 66:7 and Micah 5:2 and 3, which describe Israel as a mother in labor. And in Genesis 37, we have a dream that Joseph, the favorite son of Jacob, had, in which the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bow down to him. His father correctly interpreted this dream to mean that Joseph's father, himself, the sun, And his mother, the moon, and his brothers, the stars, would bow down to Joseph. And so this dream tells us that this woman, clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head, represents the nation of Israel. She is pregnant, or literally in the Greek, with child. Messiah would be born out of the nation of Israel. This exalted description of the woman as Israel, shining like the sun and standing on the moon and a royal crown on her head, it points to Israel's status in the plan of God. See, Israel is God's chosen people. In his book to the Romans, the Apostle Paul describes the benefits the Jewish people received from God. He says they are the people of Israel. Theirs is the adoption to sonship. Theirs the divine glory, the covenants, the receiving of the law, the temple worship, and the promises. Theirs are the patriarchs, and from them is traced the human ancestry of the Messiah, who is God over all, forever praised. Amen. Israel is God's chosen people. They are the ones that God chose. He gave them his glory in the Shekinah glory that led them through the wilderness and rested on the temple. He gave them his covenants, the law of Moses, the temple, and all the symbolic things it pictured, and all the promises of God. The patriarchs, those faithful men of old, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and ultimately Messiah himself. God chose Israel to be his light to the nations, but they failed in this task. So God has temporarily set them aside, and now the church is to be the light of the world. But God is not through with Israel. He will keep his covenant promises and the kingdom that he promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to David. Later on in Romans in chapter 11, the Apostle Paul continued, I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion, and he will turn godlessness away from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Paul here uses Isaiah 59, 20 and 21 and Jeremiah 31, 33 to 34 to show that God is not done with the people of Israel. He will still keep the promises that he gave them. And we're going to see this in more detail in our next lesson. Revelation 12:3. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. So who is this dragon? Well, verse 9 of Revelation 12 gives us the answer. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan. This image of this great red dragon is meant to horrify the reader and remind us of Satan's evil nature. He is a vicious, dangerous beast. The NIV leaves out the demonstrative word behold when talking about the great red dragon. But this adds to our dread. It's, look, pay attention. You've got to see this dragon. It says he is enormous. This word has to do with its great size, its physical magnitude. The word is also used figuratively for a great force or intensity. Satan is no small threat. He is a red dragon. Red was the color of the horse that rode out from the second seal in chapter 6. That horse was a picture of war and of killing. This is a murderous, vicious beast. He's a dragon. Dragons were common in ancient mythology as a representation of evil. So John is using an imagery from the nightmares of his readers to describe their enemy Satan. He has 7 heads, which represents the influence of Satan over the kingdoms of the world. Many suggest that these 7 heads represent the 7 historical nations that have ruled and oppressed the nation of Israel through the centuries. These being Egypt, and then Assyria and Babylon and Medo-Persia and Greece and Rome during John's day. And the seventh is that future kingdom of Antichrist that will be described in greater detail in the coming chapters. Jesus himself called Satan the prince of this world. And so these seven heads picture Satan's complete control over the kingdoms of the world. The dragon has 10 horns. A horn is a symbol of power. And 10 is, like 7, another number meaning completeness. He has 7 crowns. The word is diadem. A royal crown speaks of his authority. So these 7 heads and 10 horns will be discussed in greater detail when we get to chapters 13 and chapter 16. Verse 4, the dragon's tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. So who are these stars? Some suggest the stars represents the nations of the world that will be corrupted by Satan and follow his leadership. However, from the description throughout Revelation, it appears that much more than 1/3 of the earth's population is going to follow Satan. It appears actually to be a majority will follow him. Others suggest that the stars refer to the people of Israel. If the stars in the crown from verse 1 represent the 12 tribes, then this could make sense. For many of the Jewish people will follow Satan and his Antichrist in the last days, at least for a time. But I believe that these fallen stars should be seen as angels. Thus, when Satan rebelled against God, he took 1/3 of the heavenly hosts with him, and they would become his demonic forces. The word sky in Greek is used for the physical sky, where birds fly and clouds float. It is also used for what we would call outer space, where the sun, the moon, and the stars reside. But this same word is also used of heaven, the place where God dwells. It's the word used in the Lord's Prayer when we say, "Our Father in heaven." And in this chapter, I believe the word refers to this heaven, the place where God dwells. The word is this phrase is in the genitive case, which tells us that these stars belonged in heaven. It was their natural place to be. And we have already seen a star in Revelation 9:1 that actually refers to a fallen angel, where John writes, "The 5th angel sounded his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth. And the star was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. And when he opened the abyss," and so this is an actual evil angel. Job 38:7 tells us, "The morning stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy when God created the world." In verses 7 and 9 of Revelation 12, we read of the dragon and his angels. And this seems to confirm that these stars that are swept out of heaven are angels that follow Satan. Verse 4, "The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne." So who is the child? Well, this one is obvious. The allusion back to Psalm 22 of the one who will rule the nations with an iron scepter leaves us no doubt that this is Jesus Christ, the one who is destined to rule the nations. Number 1 on Satan's agenda is the destruction of the Messiah. He has stood before the woman since the beginning, trying to prevent the birth of Jesus. Whether it be the persecution of Pharaoh of Egypt, who killed all the firstborn of Israel, or Satan's constant plans to lead the nation of Israel into idolatry like the nations around them, or the plot of wicked Haman in the book of Esther to wipe out all the Jews. Satan has tried to destroy God's people. This culminated with what we might call the dark side of the Christmas story. Who motivated King Herod to kill the babies in Bethlehem? It was the dragon. It was his last attempt to prevent the Messiah from growing up to accomplish his work of redemption. Throughout Jesus' earthly life, Satan tried to detour Jesus from his mission. He began at Jesus' temptation in the wilderness to try and get the Lord to take the easy way out instead of following God's path. When this failed, he did not give up, for the Gospels tell us that he left him until an opportune time. Though not recorded in the Gospels, Hebrews tells that Jesus was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. When Satan couldn't get Jesus to disobey God, he instigated the people of Nazareth to try and throw Jesus off a cliff. He inspired the religious leaders to hate Jesus and to plot his destruction. Of Gethsemane, Satan tried one more time to get Jesus to abandon his mission. But Jesus prayed to the Father, "Not my will, but yours be done." Christ defeated Satan at every turn and won the ultimate victory with his death and resurrection, after which he was caught up to God and his throne. So what should we learn from this brief history of Satan and his plans? Number one, Satan's goal has always been to stop God's plan of redemption. In the Old Testament, he tried to prevent the coming of Jesus by destroying the Jewish nation, the line through which God promised Messiah would be born. Having failed in that, he turned his focus on diverting Jesus from his mission of redemption. And that failed, he tried to destroy Jesus himself, which led to Satan's ultimate defeat. See, Satan is a defeated foe because of the cross of Jesus. And I think he knows it. Now, it is possible in his pride-warped mind that Satan has deluded himself into thinking he can still win. But at the very least, we can say that it is Satan's plan to take as many people created in the image of God, to take as many people with him in his fall. 2 Corinthians 4:4 says, "The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers, so that they cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who is the image of God." And on our next lesson, we will talk more about what Satan's goal and plans are today. But the second thing I think we should learn from these brief 5 verses is that Christ has already won the victory. Some find it odd that these verses mentions Jesus' incarnation, his first coming, and his ascension, his returning to heaven. But skip his earthly life and his death on the cross and his resurrection. But all of these are included in Jesus' exaltation to the Father's throne. The purpose of John's vision here in chapter 12 is not to give us the details of Jesus' earthly life. We already know those. But to focus on his victory over the dragon. In Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3, we read, "The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. And after he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven." And you see, because Christ has already won the victory, we can live a victorious Christian life. Later on in Hebrews chapter 12, after we read of all these heroes of faith that are an example to us in chapter 11, we read, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. We can have victory in this life because Jesus has already defeated that great dragon, the devil, or Satan. And so as we close our study for today, I want to leave you with the prayer that Paul prayed for the church in Ephesus. In Ephesians chapter 1, he said, I keep asking that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the glorious Father, may give you the spirit of wisdom and revelation so that you may know him better. I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, in order that you may know the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people, and his incomparably great power for us who believe. That power is the same as the mighty strength he exerted when he raised Christ from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly realms, far above all rule and authority, power and dominion, and every name that is invoked, not only in the present age, but also in the one to come. With Paul, I pray that you may know him better, that you may know the hope to which you've been called, the inheritance that you have as children of God, and the great power, because Jesus is seated at the right hand of God, and you can have victory in your life as you live for him.